Clip. So episode 02. Hey, Kathy.
Hi, Lisa.
So if I had a take two, one of those like movie things, I would
A
snap it right
sandwich
now.
board.
Yes, 'cause this
Yeah,
is our second attempt at recording episode 02. I'm glad we're here.
I am too. I've been looking forward to it. And I have mentioned to several folks that our topic of the day is going to be self-definitions and using as our example addict and addiction. So yeah, a lot of people seem to be excited about that. Um, so
Excellent.
so we mentioned just before starting to record that a couple things that we don't remember mentioning in the first two podcasts that we might want to. So I'm Kathy Godfrey, and Lisa will introduce herself again in a moment. I've been working in the field of recovery this time for about 7 years, and have noticed just some really brilliant, amazing things about the people who define themselves as addicts, and that culture defines as addicts. So that's kind of my take and my love for doing this kind of work with people. Yeah, Lisa, you want to say something about you?
Yeah, so here I am, Lisa Mazzinetto. I'm a mental health therapist and addiction specialist, and I too have been working in the field of recovery, specifically support women for, gosh, it's been 7 years now. That's pretty amazing. And yes, I love this work so much. It is an amazing experience to be able to support people in finding their true selves and their true worth through all of their difficulties in their past. So
Yeah, I love that. I used to say when I was teaching a very long time ago that the best part of teaching was watching someone realize that they were so much smarter than they thought they were. And that's what I loved about being an educator, and being in this field. There's something similar that happens when a person realizes that they have a value, a worth that is innate. And the way I define that is that it cannot be changed by their behavior. You can't add to it, you can't subtract from it, and that no one's opinion matters, not even their own. So even when they think that they're not worth much, it has no effect on their actual worth. So when I see somebody like catch a glimpse of that, even for a moment, and have that physical, emotional, mental, that whole unified response to that, what they see, not my opinion of them, but what they suddenly see about themselves, like that's the moment.
it's magical.
It really is.
I also wanted to, well, two things. So I recognize this is not what we're talking about today, but I really just want to give a shout out to honor just for a moment Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And my heart has been really heavy knowing her loss, and I hope she had a peaceful transition and carries on. But I also wanted to say that we are recording the way that we're recording this. I thought it would be important for us to just to mention that. And I'm noticing like I'm trying to be really still and not thump things because that shows up in the recording. But we are each recording from our own homes through Zoom. And it has been an interesting technological journey, you and I. So we've navigated all of this. So that is, and we record over Zoom so that we can see each other. But then, of course, those of you who've listened to the podcast on YouTube, we're not uploading our video, but we are able to see each other in this way since we're in a global pandemic and we're trying to stay safe. So.
Yes, it was quite a journey for us to find this, and thanks to a free app actually that my daughter taught me about, how to turn audio into video so that we can do the most simple thing possible, which is just upload it to YouTube, where it's accessible to absolutely everyone, which is what we wanted. We definitely this might take us on a minute of a rabbit trail, but I'd also like to say about our intention for who this podcast reaches is we've had lots of conversations about our desire to have it be useful to people that we wouldn't normally cross paths with. So folks who might not come to see a therapist or even think about seeing a therapist, or who might not want any like personal coaching from somebody about their worth. Like maybe there are folks who don't even know that's an option. I know certainly when I was a young adult and just struggling with everything, I didn't know anything like that was
Mm-hmm.
an option. So another thing that we love about YouTube is that it's just out there.
Mm-hmm.
And if people are searching any words that come close to what we want this podcast to do, hopefully, it will be helpful to them.
Yes, I definitely hope so. And shout out to Ray for helping us simplify this.
Right. Right. Yes, that was
So,
super helpful. And that kind of
yeah.
got us going. So going forward, also, we're completely open to however this unfolds
Mm-hmm.
and grows. So it might not always be like this or look like this, but for now, we also feel like, I'm speaking for you, Lisa, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but we also feel like the content is our focus. Like we're not trying to build a following for ourselves or sell things, or like it
Mm-hmm.
really, it's, if any of those things happen, awesome. But our thing is, like, we really wanted, when we met on your back porch that months ago,
Mm-hmm.
what we talked about wanting was, how can we get this very simple way of transforming life out to more people? And that's
Mm-hmm.
really our singular goal. And everything that comes out of that will just be icing on the cake, so to speak.
Absolutely. I love that. Yes, I'm so grateful that we can use the platform to get this information out there, because it really is, as you said, that simple. And it's just about people having the courage to look at themselves and be willing to do something different.
Yeah, that's really it. I will sometimes I shorten that for folks and say, like, the only thing that you need to have in order to change your life entirely is a willingness to be wrong about you.
Mm.
Not even all the million, trillion, zillion other things that we could be wrong about, but just that one thing. You know, if you're willing to be wrong about who you think you are, then everything can change.
Yeah, I remember the very first time you ever said that to me. It was years ago at my other house in my living room, and I just looked at you like, huh?
Right.
And I think my initial reaction was like, whatever, Kathy, which of course I cleaned that up. But
Yeah, I know. Yes, and I'm so like, I'm so welcoming of those kinds of responses to those kinds of words, because I know how it sounds. You know, right? I know that it sounds crazy and too simple, and it sounds, well, it sounds impossible, really, when I say something like, you can change everything that you think you are, because nothing is fixed. Like the experience of who you are in the world is 100% created by you. And I don't mean you, Lisa, personally, but
mm-hmm,
by everyone. Like, it's
mm-hmm,
our creation. That's not just some like new age woo woo bullshit. Like, that's how your left hemisphere works. Like, if you didn't have any concepts in your left hemisphere, no words and no definitions, you would have literally no experience. And I think I mention this every time I talk about this, so forgive me, those of you who have heard it 10,000 times, but if you have not seen the TED Talk by Jill Bolte Taylor called My
mm-hmm.
Stroke of Insight, you can learn in 18 short minutes that feel wonderful how your left hemisphere works, what it creates, and what happens when it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And it is,
Yes,
yeah, all life
that is
experience.
powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's mind-boggling. Like, she couldn't even tell when her left hemisphere went offline, so to speak. She couldn't even tell where her arm ended and what was behind it began. It was just pixels. That gives you an idea of how powerful your learned concepts are in creating experience, including the very definition of your physical self.
Mm-hmm. And so when you suggest the concept that being willing to be wrong about what you think about yourself, and I know that's not exactly how you said it, what do you think comes up for people immediately?
Well, I mean,
Aside from those like tilted head looks of,
right.
you know,
And I was
blind
thinking,
stares.
I've seen a lot of that. I've also seen a lot of middle fingers coming my way. So I know that it feels very threatening.
It's fear. I mean, it's
Yeah,
rooted in fear. People think, "Oh my gosh, wait, you're telling me I have to be willing to consider being wrong about what I think of myself." And because we've always adopted what other people think about us as our truth.
absolutely. Well, and there's no that's not something that went wrong, right?
Right.
That's how we learned everything.
Yeah.
You know, in the first or second or both podcasts, I mentioned that this is the example I always use. At the time that you were taught that a particular thing had particular qualities and is called an apple,
Mhm.
you learned the exact same thing about yourself.
Mhm.
Not in a pointed way like that, but in
Sure.
all of the kind of herding and guidance and example of the people who were around you when you were learning language.
Mm.
Again, nothing mystical here. We'll get to the mystical part for sure.
Mhm.
There is one and it's delightful, but that's not it. I mean, that's just that's just how your brain works.
Mhm.
And it, again, also, if you want to see more about the science of that, you can check out Lisa Feldman Barrett's book called How Emotions Are Made: The Secret Life of the Brain.
Mm.
And she pulls in research from all kinds of areas and disciplines and her own original research about how words work to create experience.
Will you say her name again, please?
Lisa Feldman, Feldman, Barrett, two R's,
Okay.
two T's.
Thanks.
And she published that book in 2016. I want to say, I'm pretty sure it was 2016.
So we're going to talk about self-definition through the lens of an addict today. Is that right?
Yeah. And I get super excited about that. So if I start moving all around and like bumping the table and my microphone and stuff, I'm just like, bear with me. I will recover myself as quickly as I can and settle down. I was listening to a podcast this morning, actually, and a PhD, her field of expertise was not solely addiction, but it was included in her field. And as I'm taking this, my first steaming hot sandalwood bath of the season, which I'm very, very excited about, I was listening to her and I just was laughing out loud. I'm like, what, cannot wait to meet Lisa for the podcast, because so many things that she was saying are exactly what addicts are not.
Ah.
But it made perfect sense. I mean, from our current view culturally, well, even worldwide, I would dare say, our view of what an addict and what addiction is we're pretty much in agreement at this point about what it is. You know, we have some pretty extensive definitions of it,
Mm-hmm.
clinically and otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
So I was very excited to hear that it's being talked about, and excited that we can say something new.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to, I guess I want to begin by saying, we're going to be talking specifically about the definition of addict, but it works the same no matter what your self-definition is.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps you don't define yourself as an addict, but you can substitute in there what you're currently aware of defining yourself as. And then maybe we can also come around to like, so what if you don't even know,
Mm-hmm.
how you're defining yourself? Like, how can you get in touch with that? So at least maybe you can help me remember for us to come back
Yeah.
to that. So I guess let's start by, let's say a little bit about how maybe the people that we've seen in our work in the recovery field, like how we see them defining themselves. Sorry. Do you want to? Well, sometimes when I say self, I think of it as this entity that's separate, which makes me use the wrong pronoun
Mm-hmm.
because I'm seeing it in quotation marks, and
Mm-hmm.
you guys who are listening right now can't see me doing all the air quotes, but I think of self as a totally constructed thing,
Sure.
like it's just a thing that the left hemisphere has defined. So I'm not seeing that as innate to individuals like their value is. It has nothing to do with that at all. So yeah, do you want to share a little bit about
Mm-hmm.
what you see when folks come in about how they're defining themselves?
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, they're wearing all of the different labels and constructs of um, being the problem, being the not good enough, being, especially like within a family system, they need to be fixed so that the family system can be fixed. So many women come in believing they're broken, that, that they, uh, are the reason that their relationships, their family systems are failing. And, on top of trying to stay clean and sober, they carry all these beliefs about themselves that are really causing a lot more pressure on trying to stay clean and sober. And I'm so excited. Like I'm getting the Kathy like in right now because I'm excited for you to share about your ideas of what, that idea of what an addict we could see an addict to be.
That is the most exciting thing. And keep in mind, folks, that you can apply this to any self-definition that's
Right.
causing you grief in your life. And I remember what you just shared reminded me of something that a client said in group one day. She was fairly new, I think, and really like having a hard time with herself, like being with the feelings that get created by that self-definition. So that's really the issue. If you could have the thoughts about yourself that Lisa just shared and they didn't create an emotional reaction,
Mm-hmm.
so what? Who cares? It wouldn't cause this devastating pain that is happening. But of course, we can't do that. We can't define ourselves in that way, accept it as the truth. Your puppies.
I know. My dogs want to say hi.
Hi, pups. It's a Zoom thing. Everybody has their dogs in meetings these days. Um, so the problem, so to speak, with and it's not much of one. We're going to look at why it's not much of a problem. But the problem, as it happens, right now, for folks who don't understand it, is when you have that self-definition, you accept it as the truth. It breaks your heart.
Mm-hmm.
Like you live in a constant state of rejection that feels like it's coming from the world and from the people around you.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing their own thing, whatever that is, but the rejection that you're feeling is absolutely created from that self-definition that is so heartbreaking. I mean, you are literally walking around rejecting yourself every waking moment, and perhaps in dreams too, because that definition is also going to be reflected even in your dream life,
Mm-hmm.
which is also fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
So yeah, all of that pain is why we're even talking about this. It's why I would have the audacity to say, are you willing to be wrong about you? Because in order for that pain to diminish and end, you have to recognize that your self-definition was mistaken. And it is, as I'm comparing it these days, it's like a belief in Santa Claus.
Mm-hmm.
Like once you saw that Santa wasn't real, you never again struggle with believing in Santa Claus. So all self-beliefs are like that as well. So me telling you that it's not true, Lisa telling you that it's not true, you might think, oh, they're so kind. But it doesn't do anything for you.
Right.
Like you have to be curious enough to go, at least question, if another person is telling me that I'm wrong about me, is it possible that I am? And if you're willing to ask just that question, you are off and running. Is it?
Sorry. I just
Yeah.
love that. I love that because how many times, those of you who I work with who might be listening to this, how many times have I said that you might be wrong about the way you see yourself? Is that possible? And it's so hard for people to, I think that's like might be one of the biggest barriers for people to really entertain the possibility.
Right. That's why I recommend Barrett and Jill Bolte Taylor to so many people, because
Mm-hmm.
I want to offer that left hemisphere science.
Yeah.
I want you to see that there is a scientific possibility that you're wrong. No,
Mm-hmm.
it's not my opinion that you're wrong about you. I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying because of how you learned it, it's possible that you are wrong about you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Science says it's possible that you could be wrong about you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're absolutely right in that whole, like, that's the biggest stumbling block. And so let me say just a bit about that, about why that feels so solid. So a week or two, however many times ago that we mentioned this in another podcast, I was asking folks, do you remember when you learned what can be labeled apple? Do you remember that? And no one I have ever asked remembers that. I can't imagine anyone in the world does, because that's at the time when you are just acquiring an awareness of the world and that it has names.
Mm-hmm.
If in that same time, again, I'll just say if it's possible, but in that same time, that's also when you learned your self-definition. Can you see why you have just been operating as if that is you? You didn't know that it was something separate from your now conscious self that you could question.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like you, just like an apple is obviously an apple. But really, we could have called it, gobbledygook. We could call it anything. It's
Mm-hmm.
not innately an apple. That's just a sound that we came up with to represent that particular thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly how folks learn their self-definitions. So it feels like who you are, and that's why you don't understand that it's possible to change it.
Mm-hmm.
So another a lovely and helpful question is, whenever you have a thought about yourself or you behave in a way that shows you are thinking something about yourself, you could ask, like, hold on a second, like, when did I learn that?
Mm-hmm.
You will not be able to find it.
Mm-hmm.
But you can remind yourself, you know what? I know how left hemispheres work. There's a concept that contains within it a definition which elicits an interpretation of the present moment. I know that's how it works. And
Mm-hmm.
so of the elements in that very simple equation, what can be questioned? And that's how you can start to find a little room to say, oh, okay, all right, I can see then how it's possible that I learned something that is not actually true about me.
Mm-hmm.
And then now I can look at that like a belief in Santa Claus until I see for myself whether it's actually true right now or not.
And you said something to me the other day, as I love you dearly and your ability to constantly challenge my own beliefs about myself. You said something about Santa Claus, that we don't wake up every day and remind ourselves that Santa Claus isn't real. And sorry for anybody who may have small children around right now.
Right.
um, and that's true. Like, we don't wake up and have that, oh right, that reminder that Santa Claus isn't real, and oh yeah, now I can go on with my day. And that's how, you know, reconstructing the way our self-definition is something that we can wake up and not have to remind ourselves of every day.
Oh my God, yes. And there's such freedom in that. I mean, everybody listening, can you just take a big deep breath and feel how free it would be to not be constantly questioning who you think you are and how you fit into the world? What if that was just already a done deal? How much space that would free up.
Yeah,
That's a lovely, lovely feeling.
it is.
So we've seen how we can make a little crack in order to maybe question who we think we are. And so now Lisa and I are going to proceed to question the defining characteristics of an addict, how folks see themselves and define themselves as that. I think I totally didn't finish this thought a minute ago, and there's a client in a group a while ago, years ago actually, who was really struggling in early recovery and with how she was seeing herself. And she blurted out, and just in tears, she said, I just hate that I'm a junkie. When a word that I would never use, and that I do not like, because it sounds like calling ourselves garbage when we say that about anything. And I used to refer to myself as a man junkie, but a little self-disclosure there. So I know how it feels to use that word about myself. And when she said that, my question to her was, what if the judge came before the junkie? Meaning, what if you were hating yourself before you became active in addiction?
Mm-hmm.
And she was so floored at the possibility that that might be true, that she instantaneously settled down. Her body softened. She got quiet. She was kind of looking around the room like she was possibly being punked, as I would as well.
Yeah.
But that's the question. And this is my springboard into the how I see what becomes labeled as addict. So the judgment of herself, of hating herself, the self-loathing, is the feeling that she was seeking relief from. And that led to active addiction. And in this case, I think probably also some disordered eating and body image stuff. All of which makes perfect sense if you remember that what we're talking about here is that the way you define yourself is creating your experience of the world. If she was already seeing herself as loathsome, as all those things that you shared with us about how clients see themselves, then by the time she got to these behaviors that caused problems in her life and the lives of the people around her, I mean, she was in so much pain and suffering and fear from this self-definition that it truly seemed to her like she couldn't stop being destructive. And that her inability to stop being destructive proved her self-definition, that she was broken, that there was something wrong with her, that she was a colossal, in quotation marks, fuck up, which I hear from people all the time.
Yeah, it's like that's the evidence they use to perpetuate the self-definition. Well, if this is what I believe about myself, then let me find all the ways to reinforce it. And how that, I mean, we can see how we can fall into that pattern. And just like any learned behavior, we can learn something new.
So exciting. Yes, we can. We can learn something new. So that's a really super painful example. Addiction is a super painful example of the very simple thing that we talk about here, which is we experience what we look for. We're always going to be looking for that definition that we learned. We're always going to see ourselves from that perspective because we think it's who we are. Not realizing that we have a choice to question it. So, of course, our vision, so to speak, is going to be drawn to everything that seems to prove we're right. And then the thoughts, emotions, behaviors that come with that are inevitable. Inevitable. I keep saying that, and people keep saying, oh yeah, I see that. But then they criticize themselves for behavior. So if the behavior is inevitable, because of your self-definition, you see how now you have a conundrum. You can't criticize yourself for your behavior not changing if you haven't changed the way you see yourself. Because behavior is guaranteed, and I say this often about relapse. People that are labeled chronic relapsers, which I hate, but it happens, and they define themselves as that as well. It is not about not being able to stop the behavior. It's that the behavior can't stop until the self-definition changes. And by changing, I mean, you have to see that Santa's not real. You have to see that what you were saying about you just has absolutely no veracity. It's not true. There's no way to even, could you prove that Santa's real? Of course not. And neither can you prove that you're junk. You can offer some thoughts about yourself, but you cannot give me any objective evidence that I too would recognize as proof that you're junk.
And sometimes I'll question clients about that. Like, show me the evidence in this moment that you are this terrible, horrible person that
Mhm.
you continue to uh, tell me about. And it's amazing what people will sometimes come up with, which is, again, it's all coming from that self-definition. It's not true, but it's how do you talk to somebody about, like, when it's true for them, right? But as we see them, we know that that's not true. But how do you argue with somebody? Not argue, but you know what I mean, challenge
Yeah.
somebody about their truth
Right. So how do
themselves.
I inspire them to question what they're seeing as true,
Sure.
even though there's no evidence, right?
Right, right.
Well, so, you can imagine I get that all the time when I say, like, show me some evidence in
Mm-hmm.
this moment that that people don't like you. That's a big one. And they will come up with, well, because yesterday when I was in the coffee line, I smiled at this woman behind the counter and she didn't smile back.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, first of all, where is that right now?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not in this present moment. And I really do, like, stay on that present moment thing because it's
Yes.
critical to feeling safe enough to question these things, right? So that's always the first thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have to acknowledge, it's not my opinion, they have to acknowledge that it's not happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's thoughts that they're having about themselves from yesterday, and that's
Mm-hmm.
fine. I'm not saying that that's not valid. I'm merely pointing out the difference between what is real right now and what's not. So then we
Mm-hmm.
can look at the opinion of them from yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And we can say, okay, so let's look at that incident and tell me any evidence that you have that the reason she didn't smile back is because she didn't like you, this woman who's never laid eyes on you before.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, at this point, Santa's already falling apart because there's no way to know that, right? And
Right.
sometimes people, though, who've been in active addiction will have what they think are really heinous and horrific things that they have done in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the most fun to look at because I let them tell me their interpretation of it, which always is, I suck and I shouldn't be alive. I'm a disgusting excuse for a human being, all the horrible things they say about themselves. And then I say, because we've already laid this groundwork always from the beginning, I say, so tell me how you were thinking and feeling about yourself just prior to what you did. And I have never had a client who couldn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And they can say it, man. They can say all the horrible things that they thought and felt about themselves in that
Yeah.
moment. And I say, so, okay, so seeing yourself in the way that you just described, can you see that your behavior was inevitable? Give you an example from my own past. When I was going through the world convinced that I didn't matter,
Mm-hmm.
if I carried that around for long enough and I watched how it played out in my life, that I never had enough money, that my relationships were shit, that I was the worst mother in the history of the world, like all of these things that seemed to prove to me that I was right, that I didn't matter, then you can see what would come out of that, which was nearly daily
Mm-hmm.
suicidal ideation, um, more and more and more broken relationships, of course, because I was always seeing myself as not mattering in that equation. And so it would make my
Mm-hmm.
behavior insane. So I would do crazy things like I would try to seduce the partners of other people because that would make me feel momentarily powerful and like I had some value that he saw in that moment, completely ignoring the devastation I was going to feel the next day when I thought about the woman involved.
Mm-hmm.
Inevitably, the next day came and I did think about it and I hated myself even more.
Mm-hmm.
So you see how that whole definition of
Mm-hmm.
I don't matter resulted in all of these crazy behaviors, abandoning my child to go to the West Coast with a truck driver that I met in a bar. I did that
Mm-hmm.
and had no intention of coming back, truthfully. Turned out that I did, but not because I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
All because in my mind, if I didn't matter, or even worse, like by then I was thinking, oh my God, like look at the stuff I've done. My daughter would be better off if I never came back. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
She needs somebody normal to be like helping her in this world. And I am so not it. So it even went that far as to make me abandon my child. So back to our imaginary client, when they, no matter what example they give me of how heinous they've been in the past, if they can be still for a minute or two with me, they can see that what I'm saying is not my opinion, but that it is the absolute truth, that had they not believed their definition of themselves, they would never have been in the situation to behave that way. And then the next step to help them see that, like the freedom from that is, I would say, so tell me one heinous thing you have ever done when you felt loved and accepted and worthy and excited about contributing who you are into your world. Tell me a time you felt like that and then did something heinous. I'll wait.
And you do.
I do. And I do.
Yeah.
I sure do. And all of you by now listening can guess that never once has anybody been able to give me an example of that.
Sure.
We don't behave badly when we feel our worth.
Right.
That is not a thing. So now, my definition of people who later on learn to define themselves as addict, and that what they're struggling with is, quote, addiction. So I have learned over the years, both from people in my personal life, which has always been the people around me closest to me have always included folks who struggled with so-called addiction. So I have decades of personal experience with that, although that was never my struggle. And also professionally, I've worked in recovery. I've alternated teaching in college and working in recovery for over 20 years. They're very similar. I've found out what I love about them and my heart for them are very similar. So I say all of that to say, people who defined themselves as addicts are the ones who taught me what I now see as true about them. Like, okay, over 20 years, probably thousands of people struggling with this that I've known personally, I see some things about them that they have in common. And one is not surprising at all. I think everybody sees this, just extraordinary intelligence. And I don't mean that like measuring an IQ. I mean extraordinary intelligence about life, about being a human. So that was the first thing that I noticed. The second thing I noticed is that they have a hypersensitivity to everything in their environment. So if something is mildly unpleasant to us, it will be intolerable to them. And I'm not, so they think that they have been defining that sensitivity over the course of their lives as something wrong with them, because it seemed like other people could tolerate situations that they absolutely could not. And they tried to learn how to do what the rest of us were doing around them, which was just like, yeah, I see that and just be okay with it. You know, or yes, I feel that, I hear that, I smell that, I taste that, and it's fine, who cares? They couldn't seem to find a place of who cares. Like they couldn't not care about it. So there's that hypersensitivity to environment. I also noticed that they have a visionary quality along with that hypersensitivity, that they could say to themselves, because nobody else really wanted to hear, but they could say to themselves, like, this is not good. And I can see how it could be so much better. And it's not that difficult. Like there's an easy way that we could do this differently. And they discovered that people around them were not interested in doing things differently. They were interested in making the sensitive one shut up and do what you're supposed to do. You know, like don't be rocking the boat here, which gets ironic later when they find their way to active addiction, because talk about rocking a boat.
Right.
Yeah. And that makes me laugh, because I'm like, see, if you had listened to this extraordinary being early in their lives with you, there wouldn't be all this boat rocking that came later on.
Right.
So those are three of the qualities. And then the fourth one is the one that I love the most about these folks, and that is that they cannot make themselves be okay with anything that is not authentic. They can't do it. And you know how mostly socially, people are, they think that that socially there's this way of being that's socially acceptable, and it's just kind of this ritualistic exchange that we do, you know, a lot of words about nothing, and and presenting ourselves in a way that will be beneficial to us and our profession in the world and our social standing and like all of this. I've noticed over the years that what they're describing as social anxiety is their inability, say hi to your puppy again, is their inability to, quote, make small talk, talk about things that don't matter to people who are not being who they really are. This is not a thing that they can make themselves be okay with. So now we have added to their super sensitivity to environment and their vision that, God, this could be so much better and different, added to, I cannot pretend to be other than I am successfully. I can try because it's what I've been trained to do, but it does not work and it crashes pretty quickly. So now we have this person of extraordinary intelligence with those three powerful qualities trying to live in a world that just wants them to be quiet and get on with it. You know, finish high school, go to college, get a job, get a partner, get a mortgage, retire, die. And again, they cannot make themselves be okay with that because they see that there could be so much more.
Right.
So these beautiful, amazing, and what I call a next step in the evolution of humanity cannot be seen as that apparently yet. It's excruciating because they can't fit in anywhere in our old way of being because they are this new thing. They have a self-definition that it's them who's wrong because they can't fit in and do what the world wants them to do. Every time they turn on the news, even during a pandemic, they hear something about how they're the problem in this country and in the world. Addicts, I mean, and addiction. So isn't it inevitable that these folks would do something to relieve the pain of living in a world that doesn't see them and doesn't acknowledge their value? And that's where active addiction comes from. Once in active addiction, if there is any relief at all, why wouldn't they go back?
Right.
And if their self-definition doesn't change, if they don't see themselves the way I see them, for example, then they're going to continue to be in pain and fear. They're going to continue to seek relief, and it has nothing to do with who they are. That was a lot. I'll take a breath now. I'm so proud I sat mostly still. Like,
you did.
I did.
You did a great job. So I want to ask a question, if I could.
Please.
Within this definition, what happens for folks who identify in this way when they have things like they have childhood trauma? How does that fit into the narrative?
Well, I'm not sure what you're asking. How does it fit into like the formation of their self-definition or fit into seeking relief?
How does it fit into the formation of their self-definition? And, you know, as from, again, I'm going to like approach this from the clinical perspective for a minute, that a lot of folks that I work with have had early childhood trauma. You know, horrific things happen. And as a means of, you know, like to pull in what you just described as the hypersensitivity, the way of doing things differently, but being told to just sit down, shut up, do your thing, you know, conform. And then they have these experiences that, you know, is a lot of times as children or adolescents, there are no words or ways to make sense of it. And so addiction can often be you know, and it's a form of coping.
Sure. It's relief.
It is.
Yeah. It's relief from feeling the way you feel being you. I mean,
Yes.
absolutely. I mean, that's what relationships were for me entirely
Mm-hmm.
for decades. Absolutely. And I agree with you that I've never worked with anyone that didn't have some kind of childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's who finds their way to us, I think,
Yeah.
is that, and I can certainly say that I have that in common with them as well.
As I do as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So let's keep this super simple
Mm-hmm.
in how we look at it. So we're learning language as
Mm-hmm.
an infant. We learn what things are, we learn what their definitions are, what their qualities are. We learn that also about ourselves, what our qualities are that get the label of our name.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that a wild thing to think about?
Yeah,
Like
it is.
round thing with a red outside and a white middle, and this little thing sticking out of the top of it, and it's sweet and it's crunchy, that gets the name apple.
Uh-huh.
Excellent. Who cares? But what about that toddler?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That toddler also learns, here are some qualities, and it gets called this name.
Mm-hmm.
That's who I am. That's mind blowing just to even consider just the basic factual thing that happens. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, that is amazing, because we just don't really think of who I am as being something learned.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But your qualities getting a name is exactly, that's what that is.
Mm-hmm.
So that happens, and it happens, we learn it from the people around us at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really demystifying to how we see ourselves when we just ask, if, for example, you were raised by a mother and a father, to look at, even right now, if they're still here, or look at memories if they're not, and look at what's some behavioral evidence of how your parents defined themselves. And you will solve the mystery of your own self-definition,
Mm.
because that is where it comes from. Oh my God, my phone is ringing. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Dogs
I'm
barking,
like, I
phones
know,
ringing.
right?
It's part of it. This is
And
our
then
unpolished, authentic selves showing up.
I thought I did such a good job of like preparing for no sound intrusions today, but nevertheless, there it is. Um, so now I forgot where I was. Oh, so looking at your parents, looking at their behavior can tell you how they're defining themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that answers the question of what you learn to see yourself as, because
Mm-hmm.
they just shared their way of seeing an individual in the world with you, because how could they not?
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, I did that for my daughter as well. So before the childhood trauma, assuming that it doesn't happen in infancy, which it does for some people,
Mm-hmm.
but you've already learned who you think you are, even though you couldn't articulate that obviously at
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4. But you do already have an idea of who you are and how you're seen by the world around you. Then something traumatic happens
Mm-hmm.
that feels awful, that overwhelms your ability to respond to it, because you're
Mm-hmm.
small and literally powerless.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you think that it's because of your self-definition
Right.
already.
Right.
As I say all the time, it sounds trite, but I really mean it literally, that the trouble with trauma is not the event, but what you think it meant about you.
Yes.
And just like the judge coming before the junkie, like
Mm-hmm.
the powerless child that is so invaded by this particular thing, like that child already was defining herself in whatever way that she was. But the heartbreak of it is when something overwhelming happens, she thinks it's because of who she is.
Mm-hmm.
She thinks it's because of that definition.
Yes. Yeah.
And
How many times do I work with people that come from that place? They
mhm.
believe that they had a role in it. There was something they did. There was something they should have done. You
And
know.
see, what you're saying is so brilliant. They focus on their behavior when they
Mm-hmm.
criticize themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't have gone there. I shouldn't have said that. I should have told someone. I should have this, that, all behavior. Because they don't understand that the blaming themselves comes from their self-definition.
Right. Ooh,
isn't that exciting? So for people like me and many people that I've worked with, by the time we get into our teens and early adulthood, we're just wreaking havoc on ourselves all over the place.
Oh my gosh. All over. It's like, as you've said, I've heard you say in the past, it's like a toddler with a chainsaw.
Yes.
Which is so true.
Yep.
But so I love that. Thank you so much for wrapping that up in a beautiful way of understanding. But because of time, we're close to the end of our session, which I feel like our podcast.
Right.
I think we could
a 2-hour session.
Keep going. Fuck a 2-hour, right? But I wanted to make sure that we took a minute to come back to exploring a self-definition that may not fit into that addict definition, but that, those who may struggle with other forms of self-definition could still relate to this, which it seems to me, well, anyway, I don't want to impose my own.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it seems like the way they describe this, we could like pull out the definition of addict and insert whatever you're struggling with, but perhaps there was something else that you wanted to talk about with that.
I think so. An interesting thing about the definition of addict is it's really, my definition of addict, like all those positive qualities that I've seen in folks that get that label, is transferable. That truth is transferable to people who don't end up in active addiction. Like you also have some extraordinary qualities that you and the people around you haven't paid attention to because of your old self-definition. So for example, I don't think I've ever talked to anyone that didn't have some variation of there's something wrong with me. Even people who can't identify any specific trauma in their early lives, they still have that. My theory about that, and I'm totally 100% making this up, but my theory about that is that just being a little person in a world of big people that seem to know what to do, I think would bring us to that conclusion. Like, how come I can't be like that? Like what?
Right.
Why can't I do what that tall one who can walk can do? Like, not that that's a literal thought in an infant's head, but I just think it's so, I've never met a person who didn't have some notion that there was something wrong with them compared to other people. So we could use that one. If that's something that you struggle with, if you find yourself comparing your body, your abilities, your emotional response to life, your mental capacity, like all the things, the job you do, the family you have, whatever it is, if you find yourself comparing yourself to others, that is an indication that you have that general belief that there's something not right about you, at least in specific areas. So if that is something that you struggle with, then try these things that we've mentioned throughout the podcast, but it's as simple as looking in this present moment for evidence that there's something wrong with you. Like, look for it, do the Santa Claus thing, like really look for evidence that that's true. And all you're ever going to find is an imaginary standard in your head that you think you should, for some reason unknown usually, that you should be fulfilling. And this brings me back to this beautiful thing that I see that I can't not see anymore, which is, now we get to the mystical part. So you can call it life or God or love or source. You can say whatever word you learned, but something, and I'm going to say life just to keep it general. Let's say life is expressing itself as you once ever. And I mean that literally ever. Like if we go on another 800 billion years, which is looking a little doubtful in 2020, but if we go on another 800 billion years, There still won't be, it will never again express itself as you.
Mm.
And consider that if there is something more than you see expressing itself as you, even if that's life itself, that you are never left alone with this, and that there's no way to be a wrong expression of you.
Mm.
And when you compare yourself to another expression of life, it is literally like, well, to go back to our fruit analogy, an orange comparing itself to an apple.
Mm.
And saying, "Oh, there's something wrong with my skin. This can't be right. Look at me, I'm all orange and rough."
Oh, I love that so much. Like it brings like tears up for me. That is so perfect. So beautiful.
So last practice I
So
would offer,
true.
as I know it's time for us probably to wrap up, but would be coming into this present moment. Look for evidence that that is true as well.
Mm-hmm.
That you are an expression of life that happens once ever. And what does
Mm.
that mean about you? And write it down. I have my clients write it down. Write it down. Because if you just have a thought about it, that can easily be bumped out of the present moment by, yeah, but remember that
Mm-hmm.
time you did this real shitty thing? You know, and the glorious truth about this is, sure, I remember that time I did that shitty thing, and so do you. And what does that have to do with us being a singular expression of life ever?
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Yeah. Do you feel like anything's undone? I mean, I know we could talk another hour, but
We
you
could, but no,
see,
I think that's such a beautiful way to wrap this amazing hour up. I'm so excited. I hope that our listeners are energized and excited to just consider for a moment um, what it might be like to be wrong about what you think of you and how you see yourself. And I love that, just that expression of life as you ever. Did I say that
ever.
right? Ever.
Once ever. Yeah.
Once ever.
Once ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you for closing that perfectly, coming back around to our beginning point. That was delightful. And
mm-hmm.
I look forward to many more.
Me too.
Okay.
Yay!
Yay. All joy all the time, because why settle for less, right?
That's right. I love that.